All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of D&D Deep Dive, the show where we dive deep into classes, subclasses, and other features of 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons to help you get the most out of your tutor choices. So, today, we are going to be finishing the subclasses that were introduced in Tal'Dorei Reborn by revisiting two that haven't had a ton of changes. Those are the Cobalt Soul Monk and the Oath of the Open Sea Paladin. Now, for those of you that have been here for a while, or just anyone that's been going back over my D&D deep dives, I have D&D deep dives for both of those. And the reason being is they didn't originate in this book. The Cobalt Soul Monk actually originated in the original Tal'Dorei campaign setting, and then because Mercury wanted to play a Cobalt Soul Monk in the second campaign, Matt effectively had to revise it because the one that's in the original Tal'Dorei campaign setting is just not very good. It wasn't a fun subclass to play. A lot of stuff didn't work with it. It just wasn't great. So he updated it, and then for the Oath of the Open Sea, that was actually a Paladin Oath that Matt created specifically for Travis's character in Campaign 2. And because of that, both of these things already exist on D&D Beyond, because Campaign 2 was sponsored by D&D Beyond. And they use D&D Beyond throughout the entire campaign and had to have all of those options in D&D Beyond, so all of them exist. There were some changes that happened between the version that is on D&D Beyond and the version that is in the book. Something that a lot of people don't, or some people may not realize, is the original Tal'Dorei campaign setting, this book right here. Does it not say on here? Yeah, it's way on the back here. It was published by Green Ronin, which means Green Ronin had some sort of kind of partial claim to the copyright of the book, being the publisher. So the stuff in Tal'Dorei Reborn couldn't be put on D&D Beyond because Wizards of the Coast didn't own this content. Critical Role owned it, and Green Ronin owned part of it through publishing. I don't understand. I actually don't know all the details of their contract because obviously Matt was able to finagle something to allow the Cobalt Soul to get there, but I would assume that involved contract negotiations and things like that. So this new one, the new book is published through Darrington Press, which is Critical Role's proprietary publishing company. But that still means that Wizard of the Coast doesn't actually own any of this stuff. So the likelihood of any of this stuff ever showing up on D&D Beyond officially is remarkably low. And because of that, normally if an update or an errata happens to something that's published on D&D Beyond, it is instantly updated on D&D Beyond, so that if you just go into like the monk section and you click on, Way of the Astral Self, any errata is automatically updated. You don't have to look at it and then go look at the errata like you would have to do with a physically published book. Because this stuff is not owned by Wizards of the Coast and therefore doesn't show up on D&D Beyond, you can actually see right now, if you have the Tal'Dorei Reborn book and the classes unlocked, or the subclasses unlocked in D&D Beyond, you can actually see that there are some differences. And so those are the things that I want to focus on for today's D&D deep dive. So, that being said, let's dive into this. Spoiler alert, there's really only one change that happens to the Cobalt Soul Monk, and there's only really two changes that happen to the Oath of the Open Sea Paladin. So that's why I'm combining them into one video, because neither one is going to provide a lot for us to go over. But yeah, let's dive into the first one. Let's dive into the Cobalt Soul Monk. Cobalt Soul Monk was, still is, an interesting monk. The original version of it in the original Tal'Dorei campaign setting was very, very focused on information gathering and the things like that. But because of that, in combat, it suffered pretty bad because the majority of its abilities were all role-playing abilities. And even if you were doing a very role-play heavy campaign, those abilities were still remarkably limited in their role-play abilities. Like they weren't very effective in very many places, so they made some changes. And the version of the Cobalt Soul that's on D&D Beyond is almost identical. They make a few kind of wording changes just to make it flow a little bit better. For Mind of Mercury, the 11th level ability, they do make the emphasis that you can only use one reaction per triggering effect. Technically, it didn't need to be there because that rule already exists in 5th edition itself. There's nothing that allows you to take multiple reactions to a single triggering event, but Mind of Mercury lets you take an additional reaction. So that tiny bit of clarification does make it just a little bit less ambiguous and much more difficult for rules lawyers to try and manipulate so that they can do things that they shouldn't be able to do. Anyway, the big change actually happens with their ultimate ability, Debilitating Barrage. The original version of it is basically whenever you hit a creature with one of the attacks granted by your Flurry of Blows. So this is already limiting to not any attack you make, but specifically if you do Flurry of Blows. Which how Flurry of Blows works is if you take the attack action, you can use a bonus action to burn a key point and make 2 more attacks. I have seen some people that don't understand the monk, where the monk always, if you take the attack action as a bonus action, you can just make an unarmed strike for free. Flurry of Blows lets you make 2 unarmed strikes instead of 1. I have seen some monks where they would make their attack and then they'd make their bonus action attack, realize it didn't kill the enemy and go, oh, well, I'm going to Flurry of Blows then. And that's not how it works, because you've already used your bonus action to make your 1 unarmed attack. You actually have to make the choice to use Flurry of Blows before you use your bonus action, because both those actions use the bonus action. It's just the difference between a key point and 1 attack versus 2. So, Debilitating Barrage specifically has to be the Flurry of Blows attack, so this already costs a key point to do this. So when you do that, you can spend 3 key points to cause a creature to suffer vulnerability to a damage type of your choice for a minute, or until they take damage of that type, and then a creature who is affected by this feature cannot be affected again for 24 hours. The big change they make for Debilitating Barrage in Reborn is they do make some modifications to it. So first, instead of just vulnerability to damage type for a minute or until they get hit, it's vulnerability to a damage type of your choice for a minute or until the end of a turn in which it has taken damage of that type. That is a massive change. Vulnerability, if you're not familiar with how vulnerability works in 5th edition, you have 3 different ways you can take damage as far as resistance and vulnerability. You have normal, where you just take the damage. If you have resistance, you take half of whatever damage you would normally do. And if you are vulnerable to the damage, you take twice the amount of damage you would normally take. Some people get a little bit confused when you start dealing with like saving throws where you take half damage. if you have resistance like this, say someone shoots a fireball at you and you have resistance to fire damage. If they rolled 30 damage to use, well, no, let's do 20 damage because that is a little bit easier as far as having and quartering. So if you were supposed to take 40 damage, you fail your saving throw. Without resistance, you would take 20 damage. Again, we're using 20 damage, not 40, 20. Without resistance, failing the saving throw, you would take 20 damage. Without resistance, making your saving throw, you would take half damage. That'd be 10 damage. With resistance, failing your saving throw, you would normally take 20 damage, but the resistance would bring it down to 10 damage. With resistance and making your saving throw, you would normally take 10 damage. Your resistance reduces it to 5 damage. So that's resistance and vulnerabilities. So this gives a creature vulnerability to a damage type, meaning they will take double damage. In the old version, they would take double damage from a single hit, which could be remarkably useful. If you do maybe, say, piercing damage, and then the next turn you have a rogue who uses a rapier. Well, when they hit and they get their sneak attack damage on it, all of that is piercing damage. So their sneak attack would be effectively doubled. And then if they could get a crit somehow, their sneak attack would effectively be quadrupled. You can see how that can be very useful. The new version is until the end of a turn in which they take damage of that type. So that opens up to more than just a single good hit. This can be used for a single good hit, like the rogue, or perhaps dealing with a spellcaster that you know has a particularly good thing. Like a disintegrate spell can be really, really useful with this, because you can just say, oh, force damage, because that's what disintegrate that it does. And then when they get hit by the disintegrate spell, they have vulnerability to force damage, they take double damage, and then they disappear into dust. But that also means that you can combine it with a character that would get multiple attacks. So let's say you had a ranger that's using Quick Quiver. Well, with Quick Quiver and what all shooty rangers take, which is Sharpshooter, they could do a significant amount of damage, because Sharpshooter just increases the damage that they take by 10, and every attack they would take that additional 10 damage plus the dexterity modifier plus the d8 or d10 depending on what kind of bow they're using. It would turn into something really big. And with Quick Quiver, you're shooting a lot of arrows. You're not getting just 2. So this does open it up to a lot more combinations with your team, or you can just use it with yourself if you want to make it bludgeoning damage and then make the rest of your attacks. The only issue with that is by the time you would make this attack, because you have to take the attack action in order to do Flurry of Blows. So you'd use 2 attacks, then you do Flurry of Blows. If you hit them on the first turn with this, they wouldn't be vulnerable to the damage of the first attack, because the vulnerability doesn't happen until after. You would only get 1 vulnerability, and then it would go away. So using it on your own attacks, maybe not the greatest idea in the world. But teaming up with another player, knowing who's going to hit the target next, or even just, working with your team to use a specific damage type that only one person will use, can be incredibly useful. Now, the issue with this comes from, what about creatures that are immune to that kind of damage or resistant to that kind of damage? Does that get rid of that completely? Well, in the old version, technically it did. In this version, it specifically says, if a creature has resistance to the damage type you choose, this resistance is suppressed for a minute rather than getting vulnerability. A creature that is immune to the damage type you choose is unaffected. And then, again, you can only do this once per creature per 24-hour period. So, the old version was really, really easy to kind of break in counters, because a creature that's immune to certain damage types now being vulnerable to it is really, really bad. However, turning resistance into normal still kind of does the same thing that would have happened before, where instead of taking half damage, they take full damage. So you're technically still doing double the damage, and then making it so it doesn't affect creatures that have immunities, I think makes perfect sense. It's too easy to abuse without that. So that's the only real difference for the monk. And like I said, I think it works. I like this version better than the original version because that end of a turn things, that just means that there's more interaction with your team. And then clarifying how it works with resistance and immunities is essentially, it needs to be there. So that being said, let's move on to the Paladin of the Open Sea. There are two major changes. Again, there's a couple wording changes that really don't change how anything works, but there are two major changes to the Paladin. The first change is actually their oath spells. When you look at the oath spells on D&D Beyond, at 9th level on D&D Beyond, they get Call Lightning and Tidal Wave, which is a kind of interesting 3rd level spell that basically it's an area attack. You hit them with a Tidal Wave, it can knock enemies prone, and it's cool. They change it to a brand new spell that is introduced in Tal'Dorei Reborn called Freedom of the Waves, which I'll talk about in just a second here. And then for 17th level, in D&D Beyond, they get Commune with Nature and Maelstrom, which is another kind of just damaging spell. It's a water-based damaging spell. Its concentration lasts for a minute. It has some cool stuff. For the Tal'Dorei Reborn version, it's Commune with Nature and then Freedom of the Winds, which is another brand new spell that's introduced in the book. Let's go over what the new spells are, because the spells that they're replacing are basically just kind of water-based damage spells. I mean, Maelstrom is slightly more... is slightly more than just damage, because basically Maelstrom, you create a 30-foot radius thing of water. The area is difficult terrain, and any creature that starts its turn there must succeed on a strength save or take 66 bludgeoning damage and be pulled 10 feet towards the center. So it does a little bit of control where it moves characters. It makes it difficult to terrain, and it does a little bit of damage. So it is an interesting spell. Don't get me wrong. These are much, much cooler. So let's start off with Freedom of the Waves. This is the one that they get at 9th level. It is a 3rd level spell, so it uses a 3rd level spell slot. Paladins don't get access to 3rd level spells until the 9th level because they're half casters. So it's a 3rd level spell, and this is what it does. You conjure a deluge of seawater in a 15-foot radius, 10-foot tall cylinder centered on a point within range. It's got a range of 120 feet. This water takes the form of a tidal wave, whirlpool, water spout, or another form of your choice. Each creature in the area must succeed on a strength save or take 2d8 bludgeoning damage and fall prone. You can choose a number of creatures equal to your spellcasting modifier, minimum 1, to automatically succeed on this as a saving throw. And then if you are within the spell's area, as part of the action used to catch the spell, you can vanish into the deluge and teleport to an unoccupied space you can see within the spell's area. So this is a really, really interesting spell. So first things first, it's a 15-foot radius, so it's a 30-foot wide circle of water, and it's 10-foot high. So anyone in this 10-foot high, 30-foot wide cylinder has to make a save. If they fail their save, they take damage and fall prone. If they make their save, they don't do anything. And you get to choose a bunch of people that are just unaffected by it. So this isn't like other spells where you save and you take half damage. This is save and you take no damage, you don't fall prone. So if you cast this in an area where all your allies are, you can just go, I'm not going to hit all my allies. This is also a movement spell, because when you cast a spell, you can teleport as long as you're in it in some place. You can teleport to any other place inside of it. And remember, this is a 10-foot high. So it generally means it's only going to be a single plane. It's only going to be a single floor. But you can teleport effectively anywhere in a 30-foot radius as long as you put yourself kind of on the outside. There are so many uses for teleportation. It gets you out of grapples. It can do just a ton of different things. So casting this spell can allow you to kind of reposition yourself to wherever you want, still do damage. You don't have to worry about hitting your allies. It is a much cooler spell than Tidal Wave, which is basically just you do damage, and I think it might knock targets prone as well. Yeah, it does damage, and it knocks targets prone. It does more damage. It does 4d8 versus 2d8s. But you don't get to teleport, and it's just not quite as cool. It does take an action to cast, so you do have to make the choice of, okay, do I want to use my action to do this, or do I want to use my action to beat things? But I think it's a much cooler spell, and does fit into the idea of the Oath of the Open Sea Paladin. The Oath of the Open Sea Paladin is really kind of a pirate. Like, it's the Swashbuckler Rogue if the Swashbuckler Rogue were divine. Like, it's really cool. If you look at the Shurkan Marin, who is the example of the Open Sea Paladin, he's got, open shirt, and he's wearing this cool kind of like pirate duster almost kind of thing. He's got a cool looking, I guess you could call it a falcon. It's too big to be a scimitar. Just a really, really cool kind of swashbuckler style looking dude. And their ultimate ability is called Mythics as a swashbuckler. So yeah, I just like that better. At 17th level, they get access to 5th level spells. And they get Freedom of the Winds instead of Maelstrom. Again, Maelstrom was kind of interesting. It's a good spell, but this is significantly different. Again, takes an action. This one you cast on yourself. It's concentration up to 10 minutes. You gain a flying speed of 60 feet. Additionally, you have advantage on ability checks to avoid being grappled and on saving throws against being restrained or paralyzed, which is cool. When you are targeted by a spell or attack while the spell is in effect, you can use your reaction to teleport up to 60 feet to an unoccupied space you can see. If this movement takes you out of the range of the triggering spell or attack, you are unaffected by it. The spell then ends when you reappear. So, this is a 2-pronged spell. First of all, you get a flying speed, and you're really hard to grapple or paralyze or anything like that. Super, super useful. Paralysis is raw bad. And a flying speed is always cool. Being a flying paladin going around is going smiting people, super, super cool. But in addition, somebody targets you with a spell, and this is where your knowledge of spells is going to be very, very useful. Because if you know the range of the spell, and you know that, okay, if they do this, I know that it only has this far that they can shoot it. If I go this far away, you are unaffected by it, is what it says. It's not that the spell doesn't happen. You are unaffected by it. So this can be a great way to make spellcasters waste spells if they are a single to target spell. This can also be really useful if you're hitting an area attack spell where you can just go and move out of it. The issue with that being, as soon as you use that, it ends. So if you teleport to a place where you're in the air, you're going to fall and possibly take fall damage. But as long as you're aware of that, this can be a really, really cool spell. And again, Maelstrom, it's a cool spell. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that Maelstrom is a bad spell. This just feels so much better as part of the Open Sea Paladins kit. This gives them more choices in how they want to be. they're really cool. I mean, it turns them into Peter Pan effectively. You know, they can fight in the air and go like it's just a cool spell. So yeah, that is the first major change. The second major change actually happens to the ultimate ability, Mythic Swashbuckler. Again, I've mentioned this before. Paladin subclasses, your 20th level of ability, your ultimate ability for your subclass is generally what I call a transformation spell. Or a transformation ability. Basically, you get some sort of transformation that gives you abilities, and they generally last for a minute. And they tend to be super cool. Like the Vengeance Paladin, you turn into an Angel of Death, effectively. Or an Angel of Vengeance, I guess would be better. For the Open Sea, you get Mythic Swashbuckler. The original version of it, climbing costs no additional movement, and you have advantage on Strength Athletics check. If you're within 5 feet of a creature and no other creatures are within 5 feet of you, you have advantage on your attacks against that creature. You can take the dodge action as a bonus action, and you have advantage on all dexterity ability checks and dex saving throws against effects you can see. This is pretty useful. Climbing, normally if you try to climb something, you move at half speed. This you get to use your normal speed, and you have advantage on all strength athletics checks. And then with the 5 feet, advantage to the thing, that is actually really, really useful because you just have to have no other creatures within 5 feet of you. So if you have 2 creatures attacking you, if you just kind of move around one of the creatures, you might take an opportunity attack as you leave one of the creatures. But you're a paladin, you can take an opportunity attack. But moving around, even though there are 2 creatures that were fighting you before, just circling around the creature would make it so that there's no other creatures within 5 feet of you, and then you get advantage for this thing. So that does is pretty useful. And being able to take dodge as a bonus action can be very, very useful because it means that all attacks against you have disadvantage. So if you take the dodge action before you leave, then that opportunity attack is going to have a disadvantage. Now, the changes that they made in Tal'Dorei Reborn. For the first thing, you still get advantage on strength athletics checks, but you just gain a climbing speed equal to your walking speed. And if you already have a climbing speed, it's doubled. It effectively does kind of the same thing. The difference being if you already have some sort of climbing speed from a billion different things. Lots of different things can give you a climbing speed. It gets doubled. And I think, feel free to correct me in the comments down below if I'm wrong about this. I think a climbing speed generally... I want to say a climbing speed generally means you can climb most things. Kind of like Boots of Spider climbing, where you can just like walk up walls and things like that. I believe a climbing speed gives you something similar to that. You can't hang upside down or anything like that. And unlike the Boots of Spider climbing, where you literally walk, climbing speed requires you to climb. So you can have things in your hands and stuff like that. But it's still, even with it, it's still really, really useful. The 5 foot thing is the same. However, instead of being able to take the dodge action, you can take the dash or disengage action as a bonus action. So dodge action makes sense from a paladin standpoint. Paladins themselves are meant to be kind of tough, bulwarky kind of the things. Most people think of paladins as protectors. So I can understand where it came from in the original idea. This makes more sense for the Open Sea Paladin. Because the Open Sea Paladin is not so much about protecting other people. Their tenets specifically are no greater life than a life lived free, trust the skies, adapt like water, and explore the uncharted. They are explorers. They're about freedom. They're about, going out and movement. And so giving them the ability to either dash as a bonus action or disengage as a bonus action is really, it fits much better. That also means in that example where you kind of circle around, you can disengage, circle around, hit the dude that you want with both of your attacks, giving you your advantage on both of your attacks, and then run away from the dude to force them to have to come to you. And then the dexterity thing is just the same. So those are the two major changes of Mythic Swashbuckler. Is it gives you a climbing speed instead of just climbing costs no additional movement, and then dash or disengage instead of dodge. Otherwise, it's basically the same. So that is going to be all for me today. As always, if you enjoyed this, like, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and turn notifications on. All of those are super important for this to be seen by other people. In the comments down below. What do you guys think of the changes themselves? Do you like the new spells? Do you prefer just the straight up damage spells of the original version for the Paladin? And then for the Monk, do you like the new version of Debilitating Barrage? Or do you like the old one that could be kind of cheesed with the fact that it doesn't talk about resistances or vulnerabilities or anything like that? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, that is all for me today. And I will see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.